So thanks for joining us again as we continue this coverage now. We're joined by David Wurmser, a senior scholar at the Misgav Institute and at the Center of Security Policy. So look, appreciate you being with us. A lot of questions at this point, looking internally, externally. To start with, what you see taking place inside of Israel at this moment, what an incident like this sort of necessarily does to the security apparatus, to the political apparatus. You know, what do you think we're heading for? There's a lot of talk about a big war looming over us here. What does it look like to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, first it's just the situation on the ground. It's not even stabilized yet. So the war hasn't even really begun that will unfold. This is still first a situation of just trying to establish control over all Israeli territory. And then comes the next step, and the next step is, of course, a big question mark. It certainly will be something that we have not seen before regarding Gaza. I'm not quite sure how to read the Israeli language, whether they're going to administer a horrifically painful blow on Hamas or whether they're done with Hamas. That's a big question mark. And second of all, everybody's has an ominous eye turned toward the north. Because obviously this could easily spread to the north as well. So that could be a very big conflict at that point. So Israelis right now are aware this is the other shoe hasn't dropped yet, and they're getting ready.
I want to bring in President Biden's, speech. He didn't waste any time, sort of getting organized, and on many layers, issuing his strongest, form of support. It was an appreciated moment, I think, to many here to see the U.S. president so unequivocally stand up and make the effort to not just deliver a statement, to take to the podium alongside his Secretary of State and basically deliver unequivocal support to Israel in this moment. How important is that, simply coming from the U.S. president alone for Israel in a moment like this?
Well, I think it is important. Israel it isn't a nation of 300 million, so it's not a superpower in the globe. So having a superpower in your corner and clearly saying it is obviously a big help.
And offering the assets, whether it be security, ammunition, or intelligence.
And that of course is going to be a factor not in the next day or two, but certainly in the next months, which is resupply. That Israel is burning through a lot of equipment, missiles, the Tamir missiles that they put onto the Iron Domes, so forth. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of missiles. Some of them are produced in the U.S. So this is something that matters to the Israelis, is to know there's a resupply chain on the horizon. So when they burn through stuff right now, they don't need it to fight the war now, but they need it to rearm right after. That's number one. But number two is, despite the really strong statement by President Biden, and everybody needs to appreciate it. There is a policy question. There's going to be a lot of postmortems after the war in Israel. There's going to be a tremendous amount of self-criticism and introspection, but some is quite warranted in Washington too. And one of those things would be all the money that was given to the Palestinians, as well as to Iran, released to Iran. This is what it was used for. And I think there has to be a very serious soul searching as to whether the sort of policies that were until now can continue after this conflagration.
It appears the answer is clear to that. I mean, that this incident has really blown to pieces all the doctrines that were in place around containing the Gaza Strip, the ability to contain that threat as large as it was. That just evaporated. How does any sort of security official come back and justify the new fence or the new security measure? Or, hey, we've got it contained at this point.
Yeah, you raised such an important point here. In 1973, a concept failed. Yeah. In this war, a parade of concepts has failed. Not only Israeli, but international. What was 48 hours ago will not be again. And I think everything from tactical questions all the way through to strategic doctrines. I had one very senior Israeli tell me yesterday, the whole idea of letting your enemy build up and then believe you're strong enough, you can just take him on when he decides to do something to you, that security doctrine is done. The security doctrine of deterrence. Oh, Israel's so strong,
huge question
there.
Is there any deterrence left today?
At this point, no, and I'm not sure that.
It's frightening.
I'm not sure deterrence ever was a proper strategy, but one could imagine it would have been or was, but it certainly failed. The Israelis are much more powerful than Hamas, but Hamas still acted. So this is something, again, there's a parade of concepts that are on the table now.
In our minds. Yeah. Look, we know there are, budding foreign threats. That this is now spilling over. This incident in Egypt today, where Israeli tourists being shot and killed. I believe at least 3 confirmed dead from shooting on a bus, a tour bus, if I'm not mistaken. Will this be in the next chapter, perhaps? Is this sort of spilling beyond the border, not just to the north, but we're seeing, parades of celebration in Tehran, in Baghdad, in Sana'a, in Beirut. How does this affect the wider region, do you think?
Well, the wider region and also the world, in the sense that we already saw a lot of rising anti-Semitism. Jews as a whole right now, globally, have to be very careful in the next few weeks and months. And Israeli tourists abroad need to be. But in the region in particular, it really depends on how Israel reacts. The common wisdom would be Israel has to be careful and not have horrible scenes of destruction. But the truth is, I think, for the UAE, for Saudi Arabia, they understand Israel as a powerful country, and it is one of the reasons why they made peace or are making peace with Israel. And Israel cannot come out of this looking weak to them. So as much as there may be a lot of huffing and puffing, and there is some genuine anguish that some pro-Western Arab regimes might feel, seeing our awful images of Palestinian suffering coming out of this war, at the end, what they're banking on is Israeli strength.
Look, we could argue that just before this, 48 hours ago, we're sort of in an era of unprecedented optimism in terms of the diplomatic horizons in the Middle East, the Saudis, things were looking on the up in many arenas. Look, following what's happened now, is this seen as an effort perhaps by Hamas to derail all this? Is the response to some of that, perhaps? We don't know. We're not seeing it to Hamas's mind, obviously, but does this appear to be some form of reaction to what's been going on around the region?
Well, I'm sure that's in the calculation. I think Hamas is also answering to Iran. I saw a report that the Iranian opposition was getting of a conversation that the Iranian government had with Hamas 10 days ago, where Hamas was reporting that the preparations are complete. The two underground sites have been completed, and so forth. So obviously Tehran was operationally planning, directing, and preparing this with Hamas and Jihad. So this is really Tehran, and I think derailing the peace developments with Saudi Arabia are certainly one of the things they're after. But I'm also worried that as they progress toward a nuclear option, they're essentially trying to preempt the Israelis to sort of burn themselves out before they do something in the next step that could provoke otherwise an Israeli reaction. So we don't really know their motives, but there's nefarious stuff afoot.
Beyond the, I want to say the material damage, the loss of life that we're just starting to tally right now, the imagery of success on Hamas's part, it seems like dynamite for them in terms of political, tactical, everything. Are they emerging from this with a treasure trove of victory points at this point?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that this is the one thing that really has to be on any Israeli military planning. It's not just a strategic question and a military question. They have to think, how do they emerge from this in a way that overpowers the initial humiliation and loss? And let's be real, this is a humiliation and defeat. Yeah. And that means they have to come out of this with something akin to a 67 victory, something so large that the other side can't continue to maintain that it won this. And I can't imagine exactly what that would be, but I don't believe it's anything similar to what we've seen over the last 20, 30 years.
What about that, call it diplomatic capital bank, for Israel right now in terms of, the world in some ways haven't acquiesced to Israeli action at this point. We've seen that in the past, limitations on Israel's maneuverability. What's your read on where that stands today? What kind of opportunity is there for Israel now?
Yeah. Well, there is some opportunity. I mean, it is the easy part of supporting Israel right now. The images are so awful, and it's so clear-cut, good versus evil, when you see children being taken hostage and slaughtered, people, a blip of light.
Left wondering how long those images will last in people's minds, though.
Well, exactly, especially when you start getting counter images, some real, some produced by Hamas and so forth, of dead children in Gaza and so forth. But Israel at this point has to bank on the long run. It has to live in this region, and whatever comes out of this war will determine the trajectory toward the next conflict or to the next peace. And it has to come out of this looking strong, not weak. And the sympathy of the world may help on some level, but it can't be a driver of Israeli calculations right now.
Well put. I appreciate you being with us here, David Wurmser. Thanks for joining us.